How would it feel to be dragged through a public square, castrated in front of a crowd, and then have your head cut off? And still, that's not enough punishment for your crime. Your corpse is thrown to the dogs, torn apart as the crowd watches silently. No one stops it. The spectacle continues. Yes, this is exactly what happened to Basil, the Copper Hand, a man whose very existence was turned into a brutal public show. Basil was not born a symbol. He was a man of obscure origins, likely from the Anatolian interior, possibly a peasant or low-ranking soldier. What is known is that he emerged during the reign of Emperor Constantine IX, a time marked by internal decay and rebellion. His name, Basil the Copper Hand, came from his punishment in a previous uprising. Captured, his right hand was cut off, not for justice, but for humiliation. Yet instead of vanishing into obscurity, he returned. He had a prosthetic forged, a crude copper replica of a human hand, often described as capable of holding a sword. It was not just functional, it was a statement. He became a legend among the discontented. The poor saw in him a reflection of their own mutilation under imperial rule. His maiming made him more dangerous, not less. His copper hand gleamed like a badge of rage. In Byzantine folklore, his image fused with myth, the man who turned his wound into a weapon. He gathered followers, not nobles or generals, but farmers, outlaws, and deserters. He promised not just bread, but vengeance. His charisma was not elegant, but raw, sharpened by pain. He spoke the language of the beaten, not the crowned. The Copper Hand was no longer just a limb, it was a symbol of unfinished rebellion. The Byzantine Empire had grown bloated, rich in appearance, but hollow at its core. The provinces were crumbling under the weight of corruption, heavy taxation, and military neglect. Local governors extorted the poor, the central government, locked in luxury, ignored the cries from the countryside. It was in this fertile ground of discontent that Basil rose. His uprising wasn't born in palaces or plotted in secret councils. It began in the mud, in villages where people had nothing left to lose. Basil did not offer doctrine or divine right. He offered revenge. With his copper hand held high, he marched through Thrace and Asia Minor, gathering the desperate, farmers whose crops were taken as tax, soldiers unpaid and discarded, peasants with no bread. These became his army. He was no general, but he didn't need to be. He had the rage of the forgotten, and that was more dangerous than strategy. The empire dismissed him at first. A mutilated man with peasants? A joke. But Basil's force grew. Villages opened their gates to him. Soldiers deserted to join him. Imperial tax outposts were looted, their officials slaughtered. Rumors whispered through Constantinople, "The man with the copper hand is coming." But Basil was not merely a thug. He crowned himself emperor. He wore the purple, the sacred symbol of imperial power. It was more than rebellion. It was treason laced with theater. He dared to claim what only God and dynasty could give. For Byzantium, this was the ultimate crime. The empire could no longer ignore him. Troops were sent. Alliances were formed. Basil's rebellion had become too loud, too large, too symbolic, and now the machine of imperial punishment prepared to silence him forever. Basil's rebellion did not fall with a grand final battle. It withered under pressure, betrayal, and the empire's cold patience. The Byzantine state, once sluggish to respond, had become an iron fist. They starved him of allies. They cut off his supply lines. They offered bribes, promises, and threats to those around him. Eventually, one of his own betrayed him, likely under the weight of fear or the lure of gold. Basil was seized and bound, his copper hand still attached but powerless. He was no longer the symbol of defiance. He was prey. Transported to Constantinople under heavy guard, he was paraded like a beast for the capital to gawk at. But this wasn't just about shaming Basil. This was theater. Byzantium used the public stage as a weapon. The city itself became part of the punishment. Each street a corridor of humiliation, every glance from the crowd a silent dagger. The emperor's court knew exactly how to break a man. Killing a rebel was not enough. His death had to echo through time. The first punishment was castration, surgical, deliberate, and public. In the Byzantine world, to remove a man's genitals was to erase more than his ability to reproduce. It stripped away his social identity. Eunuchs in the empire could rise high, but not rebels. For Basil, this was a final insult, his masculinity severed before the eyes of his enemies. Castration served multiple purposes. It prevented martyrdom through lineage. It destroyed honor. It turned a warrior into a figure of ridicule. The crowd may have cheered. Some would have turned away. Either way, the message was heard. Castrated and bleeding, Basil was forced to his knees. A blade, curved and ceremonial, was lifted. He had once worn the imperial purple. He had called himself emperor. But now, like any traitor, he faced the axe. Beheading in Byzantium was not simply about ending life. It was about ending claim. A rebel's head, once severed, was often displayed, sometimes impaled on a spike, other times tossed into the sea. It was a statement. The mind that dared to defy the emperor no longer exists. The executioner's blade came down. One strike, two, maybe more. His head fell, and with it, the last illusion of rebellion. But Basil's body was not carried away with dignity. There would be no burial, no prayer, no final words. His corpse was dragged outside the city walls and tossed to the dogs, literally. In the Byzantine world, burial was sacred. Even criminals received graves. To be denied, this was the ultimate spiritual disgrace. To be eaten by dogs meant your soul was dishonored, your memory cursed, your legacy erased. It signified that the state did not even consider you worth the earth beneath its feet. The dogs tore into him, once a man, now flesh. The people may have watched in silence. Others looked away. The copper hand, the very symbol of his identity, was likely torn off, melted down, or thrown into a gutter. There would be no relic, no shrine, not even a rumor of survival. Basil the Copper Hand was not just executed, he was unwritten. The empire had spoken. Rebellion would not be remembered with legend. It would be fed to beasts and forgotten before morning. In the Byzantine Empire, death was not the end. It was an opportunity for the state to rewrite, redefine, or erase. Basil's execution was complete. His body mutilated, his head severed, his manhood stolen. But the empire wasn't satisfied. What followed was not just disposal, it was obliteration. His corpse was dragged beyond the city gates, not to a cemetery, not to a crypt, but to a waste ground where stray dogs and scavengers roamed. There, his remains were thrown to the animals. The message was deliberate and brutal. You were never one of us. You will not rest among us. Byzantine law, steeped in Christian and Roman tradition, still respected the dead. Even enemies were often buried. But for rebels like Basil, the empire crafted a different fate. Being fed to dogs symbolized more than dishonor. It meant a complete denial of the soul's journey. In Byzantine theology, burial was the gateway to resurrection. To be devoured by beasts was to be denied salvation. This wasn't punishment for the man. It was a warning to the masses. Let them remember the copper hand torn from his wrist. Let them remember the blood pooling before sunrise. Let them remember that no part of Basil was allowed to survive. Not his body, not his name, not even the dirt he fell on. Even his story was meant to die. No relic for a future generation to venerate. The empire didn't want to execute a man. It wanted to erase a possibility. The possibility that anyone, anywhere, could rise up and dare to wear the purple without divine sanction. The empire tore his flesh, spilled his blood, scattered his bones, and fed them to beasts. But there's one thing even Byzantium, in all its cruelty, could not fully destroy: the echo. Basil the Copper Hand had no grave, no offspring, no shrine, yet his name slipped through the cracks of official silence. Whispers passed from mother to child, from soldier to deserter, from peasant to priest. Not as history, but as warning and as inspiration. His rebellion had failed, but his defiance survived. The Copper Hand itself became myth. Some said it still held a sword, buried somewhere in Anatolian soil. Others believed it was melted and reforged into coins, cursed to bring ruin to those who spent them. Truth faded, but the symbol remained. In the eyes of the empire, Basil was a madman, a criminal who insulted the throne. But among the crushed and voiceless, he was something else, a man who dared, a man who was broken, and still stood back up with a weapon for a hand. Byzantium made an example of him, but in doing so, it gave him immortality, not in statues or scrolls, but in memory and fear. His punishment became legend. His mutilation, his death, and the dogs that tore him apart, all became darker than fiction, more powerful than truth.